Mr. Collier, and today we're going to do fractions, decimals, percents, equivalencies. Okay, so we're going to learn how to write equivalent forms of each one. Each number you can write as a fraction, a decimal, or a percent. So let's look at firstly how to change from a decimal to a percent. This one's pretty easy. So for any decimal, let's say we've got like 0.07 for instance. Well, that equals, you can always write it as out of 100 by moving the decimal two places, or in other words, by multiplying by 100. Okay, this is 7 out of 100, which is 100%. Whoops, I meant a 0 there. Okay, so you just multiply by 100 or move the decimal place twice, right? So let's say we've got something like 0.125. We can just multiply that by 100 and you get 12.5%. So you can just multiply by 100, okay? Which is the same as moving decimal place 2 to the right. Okay, so obviously then backwards, percent to decimal, we're going to divide by 100. Divide by 100, which is move decimal 2 to the left. Okay, making it smaller, of course. Okay, so if you got a percentage like 13.6%, then we just divide that by 100 and we move 2 to the left and we get 0.136, easy peasy. Okay, if we look at now fraction to percent, let's keep that up there. Fraction to percent, well, if you get a fraction like 3 out of 20, so you want the denominator to be 100. So it's pretty easy. A non-calculator, you can just multiply numerator and denominator by 5 and you get 15 over 100, which is 15%. Okay? And sometimes you can simplify, like divide numerator and denominator by something to get 100, and then you can, then that's a percent, right? So you want the denominator to be 100 if you do a non-calculator. With a calculator, you just divide. With a calculator, you just do 3 divided by 20. On your calculator, you get 0.15, and you already know how to change that to percent. You just multiply by 100. Okay, so on a calculator, you would just divide these numbers and then multiply by 100. You get the percentage, right? But otherwise, you want to try to make the denominator into 100, okay? So, so convert, let's say, yeah, should I say convert or write? Let's say it this way. Write an equivalent fraction with denominator 100, okay? Or with the calculator, just divide. Okay, just divide the two numbers and you can, and then change to a percent. It's pretty easy. So percent to fraction, that is pretty easy. So if you say we've got a percent like 34%. Well, percent really means per 100. So you can just write it as out of 100. And if you need simplest form, you can always, simplify, but you should already know how to simplify fractions. Okay? So it's easy as that. So just write as a fraction out of 100 and simplify if necessary. Okay, let's take a look now at decimal to fraction. So of course you could take your decimal and then go to percent, then go to a fraction if you want to. You already know how to do that, right? But decimal to fraction is actually pretty easy anyway. So even if you get a decimal like 0.007, let's say 0.03. Okay, how many decimal places do we have here? We have 5 decimal places. I should probably write this down bottom under the math part. 0.00703. So it's 5 decimal places. So that means you can write it as 703 out of a 1 with 5 zeros. So like 100,000. Okay, and that's it. So that's all you need to do. So you need to write it as, well, maybe we could say, yeah, write as a fraction with a denominator of 10, 100, or 1,000, or 10,000, etc. Okay, that's all you need to do. The number of decimal places equals the number of zeros here. Okay, maybe I'll just illustrate that. There's 5 decimal places, and there's 5 zeros. Let's look next one, fraction to decimal. Well, if you've got a calculator, you can simply divide them on the calculator, but otherwise you want to again make the denominator to be probably out of 100 or 10 or something like that. Okay, so for example, let's say we've got 2/5. Well, that equals 4 out of 10. And once you got a power of 10 down there, you can just write it as a decimal. That means it's a decimal with 1 decimal place because there's 1 0, right? Okay. So you need to write an equivalent fraction with denominator 10 or 100 or 1,000 or 10,000. These are called powers of 10. So you need a power of 10 in the denominator, then you can write it as a decimal. Or of course, again, you can simply divide the numbers on your calculator.